Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's forum on accessory dwelling units, where we'll be talking about how homeowners can become home creators. My name's Todd Horner. I'm a planner at Southwest Region Planning Commission based in Keene, New Hampshire. And I'm really excited about tonight's event, this forum, for a number of reasons. One, we have folks tuning in from both Vermont and New Hampshire and beyond. So it's nice to see folks take an interest in this issue across northern New England. And I also am excited because this event really kind of just emerged somewhat organically through the collective hive mind of housing advocates and those of us interested in this. I can't even really recall how the idea came up to host an event like this. I believe it was I received a note from Jen Risley at the local Crowd Monadnock, which is the Monadnock region's crowdfunding platform. She had a conversation with Chris Lee, I believe, who's one of our panelists tonight, saying, hey, this might be some cool programming to put on for our region. Somehow connected with Mike Keese at Vital Communities, and he got in touch with his network, and I think we've pulled together a really interesting group of folks to share their experience and knowledge on accessory dwelling units. So thanks to Vital Communities, the local Crowd Monadnock for functioning as hosts for this event tonight, and thank you to our panelists. We're trying to keep it relatively informal tonight. The idea is that we don't want to just have a bunch of talking heads broadcasting information to you. This is really about opening up a space and perhaps creating a community of like-minded folks who are interested in this topic and learning more. So it's really about sharing resources, making connections, and really empowering all of us and all of you to explore this issue of how homeowners, each one of us, could potentially become home creators. It's going to take creativity and really a grassroots effort to address the housing challenges I think we're all aware of in New England and beyond. So that's what this night's event is about. Just to give you a quick synopsis, we'll be hearing from several panelists, and throughout those presentations, feel free to use the chat for questions, for comments, for sharing any observations that come to mind. Feel free to have some side banter in the chat, considering the informal nature of the event tonight. And I think, and just some basic Zoom etiquette, we're all in this group called together. We want to encourage connection, but we also want to avoid unnecessary distractions. So just be observant of whether your mic is live or not. And we'll be opening up the floor for questions later on after the presentations, and we can either use the chat function or if folks want to use the raise your hand function to queue up for verbal questions, we can accommodate that as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to someone who I think knows a bit more about ADUs than I do. James Vale over at Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. James is a project manager at Southern New Hampshire Planning. Just to give you a quick bio of who James is, he went to school at the Carsey School of Public Policy at University of New Hampshire, where he got his master's degree in community development policy and practice. And his master's work focused on identifying and addressing the low production of accessory dwelling units in the city of Manchester. So over the last 10 years, he's applied his knowledge in private industry to revitalize downtowns throughout New England, and through public sector work for the city of Nashua as their downtown specialist. So James comes to us with quite a bit of knowledge and background on the topic. He's going to kick things off tonight with a few initial observations, and then he's going to lead our Q&A. So I think, James, if you're ready, I'm going to turn it over to you to kick off the discussion.
Thanks for that introduction, Todd, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you see my screen?
It is starting. Yep, we can see your screen.
Great. All right, I'm going to take a minute and just try to set the stage for our speakers. This evening, you're going to hear from several speakers working to address the need for housing in the Northeast. And you'll hear how developers are creating business models around accessory dwelling units, how they are being financed, how communities are advocating for the allowance of ADUs, and how towns regulate their development. Each speaker represents an important step in the process of developing an ADU. You too, as a participant in this webinar, have an important role to play in the creation of housing. Each of our stories are different, but our collective story is one of shrinking households, yet growing homes. Today, more than 1/4 of all households are one-person households, yet only 15% of homes have less than 2 bedrooms. So there's a clear mismatch between housing needs and its use. The trend of smaller households in larger homes has been decades in the making. Baby boomers have aged through child rearing and into retirement. Older people, now often with an empty nest, have less need for their large homes and multiple bedrooms as their growing children are now adults amidst their own households. How is this affecting people? Well, nearly 1/4 of adults aged 65 and older are considered to be socially isolated, which can have terrible ramifications for seniors. The CDC finds that social isolation is linked with a 50% increased risk of serious health conditions such as dementia. At the same time, millennials have been shut out of home ownership, contributing to a major gap in wealth when compared to their parents' generation. ADUs stand poised to bring us together. Each under-occupied home is an opportunity to bring together playful children and lonely seniors. Each abandoned swing set represents a chance to repurpose tired spaces into accessible backyard cottages, capable of supplementing a senior's fixed income or meeting the needs of a person with mobility limits. Each empty nester who is offered a viable way to downsize in their neighborhood also represents a home freed up for a young family. These solutions are not exclusive of one another. They are codependent and offer social, economic, and health benefits that go far beyond the issue of housing. While time has separated us into young and old, haves and have-nots, solutions do exist. Today, housing conditions merit active participation from local government to unwind the policies that unwittingly contribute to housing inequity. So before we move on to speakers, I just wanted to share this one example of how one municipality became an instrument of support for housing production. The city of Eugene, Oregon has something called the Pre-Approved Accessory Dwelling Units Plan, Accessory Dwelling Unit Plans program. This provides a simplified, predictable, and low-risk process for homeowners to legally build an ADU. The program allows homeowners to choose between a variety of free plans on file with the city that and they can select a design that best fits their need. The provision of free plans means homeowners can bypass many of the upfront costs associated with building an ADU. Costs such as hiring architects, engineers, paying permitting fees, and other costs associated with obtaining approvals from planning and zoning boards. Putting this type of program into place requires a culture shift from planning departments, away from a position of housing policing and towards a position of housing facilitator. This is just one of many solutions that local governments can take as an authentic gesture towards addressing the community's overall housing needs. While we hear from our speakers today, I ask you to consider how your local government can play an active role in supporting ADUs to bring our community together. And so with that, of my little intro bit, I want to introduce Chris Lee. Chris Lee is our first speaker tonight. Chris currently is currently the head of design and development at Backyard ADUs, which is a company focused on making it easier for people to build small homes, both in their backyards and on standalone plots. Chris has been heavily focused on the zoning barriers and the zoning and the barriers it creates to more affordable housing, more affordable building lots, smaller dwellings, and as a result of the times, trying to identify ways to reduce the cost of construction. Above all, Chris wants to make new construction available to everyone. Chris lives in Brunswick, Maine with his wife, dog, and soon to be new daughter. So I hand it over to you, Chris.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, James. And I didn't realize I was first, but that's okay. I am ready. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank everyone for coming. This is really the first step for big ADU adoption anywhere, is just people coming together and learning that it's a possibility. As we've been out and about throughout New England, these events we've seen have been just fantastic for giving people the motivation to get out there and build housing, whether it's for their mom, their son, or as a rental unit. So what I want to do, I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I figured one of the best ways that I can contribute is to share some ADUs, some small homes, and talk about who's living in them, to give some people ideas about what they can do in their backyards or on small lots throughout New Hampshire and in Vermont and wherever else people are dialing in from. I'm going to jump in here and share. I'm going to keep an eye on the time too. 5:45. Okay. Play. Okay. All right. So as I kind of said, we are we've been helping out with building ADUs and small homes across New England. Started in Western Mass. We picked up, helped a couple people out, or helping a few people out in Cape Cod, in Boston. And I live up in Brunswick, Maine, as James alluded to, which is why we started helping up in Greater Portland. And for some really weird reason, we haven't done anything in New Hampshire and Vermont, but we are absolutely dying to, because it's an area that I love to spend time going up to the Whites, going up skiing in Vermont. So anyway, we're really excited to get out there, and very excited to see this event happening, especially because they're the only two states in New England that have statewide ordinances to allow ADUs. Doesn't make any sense, but this is the first step. So I'm just going to talk about some of the small homes. So this is a oversized tiny home. It's 740 square feet. It's 2 bedrooms. There's a big full-size galley kitchen in there. There's a front deck. And this is sitting behind somebody's house in Scarborough, Maine, on a 2-acre lot. And this house was built for somebody's daughter who just couldn't afford to buy a house in Scarborough because the entry price in Scarborough right now is like $450,000. So she and her son now live in her parents' backyard, and they've got a long-term family plan where she is probably going to take over the big house at some point, and the parents are going to move into this ADU because it's an accessible single-floor home. So a really neat, really standard Cape-style design, but extremely functional. And utilities wise, this is actually built on its own septic system and connected into the existing well, which I know will be a question a lot of people have doing anything in northern New England. So here's another neat example. So this is bigger. This is 850 square feet. This house actually has 2 bedrooms and 2 full bathrooms in it, all tucked into 850 square feet. And this was also built with multiple purposes in mind. So this is tucked in a backyard in Florence, Massachusetts, and it was built for somebody's adult son who has Down syndrome, and he's able to live on his own, but still needs to be near his parents. So building this ADU was a great way to kind of put that together. And it's got 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms because he's probably going to live with a roommate or a caregiver at some point. So the parents were planning, and again, thinking multi-generational. This family too sees potentially a shift happening where the parents may end up being in here because again, it's single floor living and accessible. So here's another small home. This actually isn't an ADU, but it could be an ADU. This is 1,150 square feet. It's a little bit bigger than most areas allow, but there are some areas you could build this big, but it's a neat example of how you can get taller. If you have to do a small footprint, you can do something, a story and a half. And this is another example of someone coming back to an area that just couldn't afford to get into the market. It's just too expensive. So they opted to build small. And this house is actually fully net zero too. So there's no utility bills here, which is kind of neat. So here is another ADU. This is a 650 square foot home. And this is Leeds, Massachusetts. This was built for somebody's grandmother or somebody's mother in the case of the adults. And she moved back to America from Israel to be closer to her family as she gets older and to help take care of her grandkids. And they built this with the help of a program in Massachusetts called the Home Modification Loan Program, which gave them 50 grand to put this up. And that kind of married up the budget to make this possible. And now they're living all on one lot. And this is in Leeds, which is part of the Northampton jurisdiction for building permits. And they just have a wonderful set of rules for getting this stuff done. And they're having quite a lot of adoption in the last couple of years. But this is also a fully wheelchair accessible design. Obviously these stairs are not, but there's a ramp that goes around back. So these, as RJ will tell you later, can be fully wheelchair accessible. And that's for the grandmother in case she's ever in that situation. So here's another one. This is a really simple one. This is probably one of the kind of least expensive things somebody can do, especially if they're using offsite construction, is something very simple. This is just a 525 square foot, 1 bedroom. This was also built for somebody's mom who's aging in place here now. And it's an ADU right in someone's backyard. Another neat example, this is another bigger one, 750 square foot. This too has 2 bedrooms in it. It's got covered parking. This one, interestingly, has its own road access, and this was built for an elderly gentleman moving to Maine from New Jersey to lower taxes and try to just lower his cost of living. And again, this one is net zero too. So this guy, he sold a house and his cost of living is only $3 grand a year. It's and whatever he eats, but it's a very, very neat situation for Al. And this is a cool one. So this we actually saw out in Portland, Oregon a couple of weeks ago. This is a lot bigger. And this is a neat one. I just wanted to share this because it's got this awesome space underneath it for parking. And then this crazy thing, extremely modern. I don't know how many people are interested in this kind of thing, but it is kind of funky and neat. So I wanted to show that. That was out in Battleground, Washington. And then finally, I'm going to wrap it up. One of the things that we have been really interested in trying to figure out is obviously how to help people do more of this. And the biggest issue, or one of the biggest issues, is just the cost of construction these days. And we have been trying to figure out how to make it possible to do DIY finishing of modular homes and making that approachable to people. So what I wanted to do is share a couple of images of what does a modular home look like after it's set and waterproof. So you can see over here, this is all insulation ready to be sided. This is what some kitchens look like when they show up. Their cabinets are already in, sinks are in. There's no flooring. This is kind of neat because you can kind of see what's inside of it when it's even coming off the truck and being set with a crane. And then here's a couple more photos of what these look like when they come. But the DIY opportunity, we've had quite a lot of interest in Maine for DIY. A little bit in Massachusetts, but the regulations in Massachusetts make it a lot harder to do anything DIY with construction, with the licensing. But I think Vermont and New Hampshire would allow stuff like this to happen. So we want to throw that out there. There's an opportunity to create a very approachable DIY option to do ADUs to really cut the costs down a lot. And with that, I'll hand it back off. I think that was 8 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chris. Our next speaker is RJ Adler. RJ has spent an exciting marketing career that spans fundraising at the I'm sorry, RJ, if I butcher this, the Keewaydin Foundation, his boyhood summer camp, and the community organizing at Suncommon, a solar energy company. RJ has a keen interest in accessible housing, which has driven him to Wheelpad, where he aims to help more people live independently. RJ lives in Berlin, Vermont, where he enjoys going outside, spending time outside, dancing, and playing music. So with that, we'll pass it off to RJ.
Howdy, folks. Thanks so much, Todd and James and Mike and everyone for putting this together, the other panelists. We've had a lot of meetings and it's been fun to see this come together, but it's almost more fun to just connect as an industry. This is a young industry and watching it grow is very exciting, especially because you heard James say, I used to work in the solar industry and I see a lot of similarities between where the ADU industry is now and where the solar industry was 15 years ago. Folks are really excited to build accessory dwelling units for a whole lot of reasons, but it's hard if you don't have the time, money, energy, or expertise to put it together. So, you know, a lot of the folks on this call and a lot of the folks that are presenting today are trying to bring together the tools to make it easier. And hopefully one day in 15 years, we'll see companies, you know, that are as, you know, ubiquitous and large and employ as many people as, you know, Tesla, as Sunrun, as Suncommon, as the solar industry has grown. So I believe we'll see a sort of a similar track for the ADU industry. So I'm here to talk about Wheelpad. That's what I do every day. But you know, also thinking these big thoughts from the safety of my own 300 square foot office space here in Berlin, Vermont. So what you're seeing here is a picture of a Wheelpad. It is a demonstration product that we set up with one of our first models. And Wheelpad makes rapidly installable home attachments and backyard accessory dwelling units that can make any property universally accessible. So we are sort of in a corner of the ADU industry that is to provide for folks who need to move home after an accident, that are looking to get their parents out of a nursing home quickly because of a global pandemic, or are looking to just provide a little bit of extra space for a son or a daughter to increase their independence. So here you're seeing a picture of one of the first Wheelpads. The view is sold separately. My apologies. You're just going to have to come to Vermont if you're not already here to see it. What we do with Wheelpad is we roll it up to a home, and in about 2 weeks we can attach it. This small model is a bedroom and bathroom. So you'll see some more pictures of it later. Now, for those folks that are paying attention, that's not technically an accessory dwelling unit because it doesn't have kitchen facilities. We do have larger units that have kitchen facilities, but just in the modular world, that's kind of what brings us to the conversation today. This is Julie Lineberger, and this is Riley Poor. Julie, and taking this picture, who you can't see is Joseph Sincata. Julie and Joseph in the 80s started Line Sync Architecture, and about 25 years later, their godson Riley was in a traumatic accident which resulted in quadriplegia. He was moving across the country. He thought, oh, I'll just find he had a new job at the time. He thought, I'll recover, I'll find an accessible housing unit. And well, gosh, he couldn't. So while he lived in a hotel for 6 months or for 9 months, they bought and renovated a home that could suit Riley's needs. Out of that conversation came, oh, gee, what if there had just been a home attachment that could have suited your needs? And indeed, that's what came of it. So we've grown out our model base, and you can find more of those on our website. But this is where we are now. This is our bread and butter product. It's that 200 square foot bedroom and bathroom, some sort of universal accessibility features that are built into these are some things that you can't even see. And up here on the ceiling, there's a track to aid in transitions from one end to the other. The bathroom itself is a full wet room, which means, hey, it's easy to clean, but also anybody can shower in there. You don't necessarily, this isn't just for people that have mobility challenges. So for the Eagle Scouts that are on the call today, like my dad, that are thinking ahead, that are planning ahead, as you're looking at any building project, right? Be it a modular project like this, a custom modular project, like something that Chris could provide, or just a stick-built project of your own. Consider universal design standards, because you're not only going to make it a place that you're going to be able to live yourself more easily as you age, but if you have grandkids and you're rolling them in on a stroller, how much easier is that going to be with zero entry, right? So the idea of universal design is not just to suit one person; it's to suit all people in all situations. Few other pictures here that you're seeing of the other sides. When folks connect WheelPad to their home, they do it in a lot of different ways, right? This family in Burlington wanted a little kitchenette, and we were able to sort of design that into the connector. And as you can see, there's doors on either side, so you can connect through the swing door, you can connect through the sliding glass door. I'm going to play this little video clip of some folks that we worked with down in Brattleboro. Oh.
This is so exciting. It's going to be a huge opportunity for Dad. And it's beautiful. Love it.
Well, thank you for designing this wheel pad as well as helping us to put it together.
It's been a pleasure. I'm really glad you're able to be back home.
Yeah.
Really,
I'm looking forward to it.
X out of that a little quickly, but so you just met John and Bob Everingham, and this is a bit of their story in terms of their timeline. In March 14th, 2020, we had the COVID lockdown. I think everybody remembers that. We got a frantic call from Bob on the 16th. We found out, and he said, hey, we need universal accessibility. Fortunately, he wasn't too far away from our main office in Wilmington, Vermont. And we found out no permit was needed on the 19th. They were able to move Dad out of the nursing home. And we were able to, just about 2 weeks later, start construction, which took about a weekend to connect the wheel pad, which is sitting here, and it's 5 feet away from their house. So this is one of the many options that's available to you. And just a a bit here about modular, right? And a bit here about the wheel pad, and some comparisons that can be made. You can build a lot more quickly. You can, your backyard isn't going to be isn't going to be a construction site for the 3 days of summer that we're lucky enough to have here in northern New England. If you are, looking at a wheel pad or looking at a modular product versus focusing on, living through a renovation product on your own. And the other option that folks are facing right now is going off to a nursing facility, right? And a lot of the benefits that come with remaining at home, maintaining your routines, maintaining your connection to your community, a lot of those are coming as well with installing an ADU on your property, and having space for your caregiver to live while you live in the main house, living in the ADU while you rent out the main house, and that gives you the financial security that you need to age in place, and you're not sending your wealth away in rent to a facility somewhere. So that was quick, and I'm always happy to chat more. This is how to reach me. Feel free to give me a call. Phone rings in my pocket, and thanks so much for taking the time tonight, folks.
Thank you so much, RJ. That was really fascinating. I know I have a couple offline questions for you. I love the concept of a small box, big box. I think that's really cool. So more to come. Our next speaker is Tyler Maas. He is the Director of Special Programs at the Vermont State Housing Authority and Director of the Montpelier Adu Program, the first ADU program in the nation to be funded by Community Development Block Grant funds. Tyler has a background in construction and construction management and has a master's degree in intercultural service leadership and management from the STI Graduate Institute, which is an international training institute, I believe. He can clarify when he jumps on. Before moving to South Burlington 2 years ago, Tyler lived in Brattleboro, Vermont, where he volunteered with the Brattleboro Area Affordable Housing as the chair of their Apartments and Homes Committee. Well, in his time there, he helped create, in his time chairing that committee, he helped create 17 ADUs over the 5-year span. Tyler also lived in an ADU in Brattleboro for years before he knew what the term even meant. And so with that, let's introduce Tyler. Tyler, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tyler Maas. I went to SIT Graduate Institute in Brattleboro, Vermont, and I did live in an ADU. My sister was having her second child, and I was just being so bored in Florence, Italy, that she said, you should come back to Vermont or come to Vermont, where I never lived before, and help me with this kid. We got a place for you to stay. I figured I'd be bopping around a little bit, so I said, sure, came back, helped them move to Vermont, to this nice place, and they had a really nice little in-law apartment attached to it. I was like, this is great. So I loved it. Cheap rent, and helped my sister out. And then, 3 years later, she left, and I ended up buying my own home because I was able to save so much money, like cheap rent in the ADU I was living in. 10 years later, after I'd finished my master's, I was approached by Brattleboro Area Affordable Housing to work in their with their volunteers to then do a myriad of different programs, one of which was their Apartments and Homes program. And so that had started back in 2001 with $1,000 in the bank, and they were offering incentives to people to build ADUs. And eventually, or after about a year of that, I ended up, I liked it so much that and the founder of the Apartments and Homes Committee left. So I took it over and increased the incentive grant up to about $5,000 and started more marketing, and realized that there was a real, the psychology of the incentive. People were like, oh, cool, this is something we can do. And people didn't really know. This is like, 10 years ago now, and ADUs this was a brand new idea. And so it was really fun to be a part of that. Is very organic feeling. They're like, sure, permit. Yeah, whatever. Architect, who cares? I'm just gonna build this in my basement. It was a pretty wild time now. Like, I think back to it compared to the zoning issues and all these things that we have to deal with now. But we have we've come a long way, baby, and here we are in 2021. And a couple of years ago, I designed a program to as a pilot for Montpelier to create accessory dwelling units, and I'm going to share some slides here with you now. Until I'm sharing. All right. There we are. That everyone can see?
We see it, but it's in presenter.
It's in
view, so-
presenter. I clicked the little thing.
So you might have to unshare your screen and reshare it so that you pick the right window pane.
Now, that'll be interesting to see if I can pick the right pane. Might end up being in presenter mode if I don't get it right this time, but they aren't that pretty of pictures anyway. So let's try that. Screen sharing error. Never saw that before. There we are, stuck in it again, huh?
No, it's looking good.
Good enough for government work, right? Here we are.
The
Over
slides are legible, Tyler. So feel free to roll.
Yeah. Not sure why it's not doing full screen. All righty. Anyway, one last check because it does say display settings. Loving it. All right. Is that better or worse?
That's great.
You nailed it.
All right, good. And I have 30 seconds left of my presentation, right? All right, sorry,
fine.
everybody. So here to talk about the Montpelier Adu program. This was, like I said, a pilot program, and we decided, ADUs were so easy in Brattleboro. How can we make this really hard? I know, let's use community development block grant money. Tons of regulations. Got to work with the city. It's never been done before. No guidebook. Sounds great. Let's do it. So we figured we need to get a bunch of different money together because we couldn't get it all because I had to get paid for the work as well as providing some grants. And so we started over a course of a year, started layering up the funding. We ended up getting $300,000 from the Community Development Block Grant through the state, the Department of Housing and Community Development. And then worked with the Vermont State Housing Authority to get an enable loan, sort of was a payback of other revolving loans to create $100,000 kitty for loans to people that offered for that was basically at the onset of the project. And then we got the city of Montpelier to kick in $50,000. That was more of the flexible funding because actually the community development block grant did not allow for freestanding ADUs or additions, no new construction, right? These were all renovations. So that was a limitation on the program. That was fun. And but what it did really is it got me back to my roots, right? Back to the late 90s when I was living in an ADU and extra space, and I started finding it all over Brattleboro. And I think there was only one that I created down in Brattleboro that was brand new, full freestanding unit. I think there was only one addition that was created. And so I realized that there's so much space left in people's houses. And we always think about these ADUs, these beautiful pictures, these things that people see, and it is expensive. And unfortunately, construction is getting more expensive. And also here in northern Vermont, during the 3 days of bad skiing that RJ mentioned, there isn't much of a construction season. So we need to so working indoors, having something where you don't need to break ground is really important way to get things done. You can work all winter long. You don't have to think about that aspect of it. We also mentioned private because we do have a lot of money to kick in from the homeowners themselves, and so that's one thing that we hope to get dialed in more is funding for homeowners for ADUs beyond these grants, maybe large loans, etc. But this program, I will say that we do a tie to affordability. So we either the owner or the tenant needs to be at 80% of area median income, and 51% of the projects need to meet that criteria. It's a 5-year criteria. But there's only certification at the onset of the project. So if a tenant is determined eligible and they stay there for 5 years, they are encouraged to for gainful employment and get more money. They wouldn't lose their housing for being over the 80% of area median income. Just going to share a couple stories with you. This is actually one of our the flexible Montpelier money. We ended up doing some additions, one addition and one freestanding. But this was somebody's home that they had bought through a home ownership program. They had subsidized housing through Section 8 program. Eventually got in the home ownership program. Bought a house, has aged there, raised her children there. The kids moved out. She was ready to retire and wanted to build an ADU to get some extra money to aid with the retirement. Built the ADU, and then COVID hit. And her daughter lost her job and had nowhere to go with her kids. So quickly, what was going to be grandma's house with this nice little ADU on the side for income turned into grandma lives in the ADU. The kid and the grandkids moved into the big house, and it saved a family. So it was just, this shows really the flexible nature of ADUs and how it can just switch on a dime to meet people's needs, to go from extra income to a big house to having family come and help, and it can move fluidly between those things over the course of its life. Just a couple more slides on type things with these unused space. Somebody had this rec room type space that was off their kitchen in their house that they just ended up not using a whole lot, small family growing. And really, there was actually a bathroom off of this space. And so by walling off that side wall over there and adding the kitchen, all of a sudden they have an apartment. And since it was backed up to the kitchen in the house, they didn't have a whole lot of problems with hooking up the water and electricity. So quickly turned that extra space into extra income. Look familiar? This is not my house. This is RJ's house. No, I'm just kidding. This is someone's storage above their garage. At one point, they had gone in there with plans of doing something. We can see where they had insulated and chopped up some of the wood. They're like, oh, we're gonna live up there. My kid's gonna have his band practice space up there, or something like that. And eventually, just turned into clutter storage space. When we started the Montpelier Adu program, they decided to get back into it and turned it into, again, by throwing a kitchen into it, bathroom and a bedroom. It actually turned into a full 1-bedroom, but that's the same view. It's one of my favorites because it really went, this is the same angle from this to this. So it was a great little project. Right now, we have completed 4 projects in the past 2 years. And the last year basically did not count because nobody was able to get anything done. but we have a couple more projects already active. Actually, it should be 5, but one of them is just finishing. But you can see there's a freestanding garage over here that was the upstairs is going to be transformed into an ADU, and that project is underway. The one in the middle was a walkout basement that is actually complete, and I think I owe that woman 20 grand. So better get back to that because she just sent me over the certificate of occupancy and probably wants her money. This on the right is a house that has a classic in-law apartment, sort of on the far left side there. It had 2 rooms and a bathroom, so it was a matter of walling it off and creating an entryway, or proper way of getting in and out. So what I'm really starting to promote, all ADUs, freestanding, floating, flying, additions, you name it. But I always want people to remember that we do have a lot of space inside of homes, inside of garages, in barns that can also be transformed into into an ADU to be flexible living space. It can be, for yourself, for a rental, and dare I say a short-term rental. I'll get my hand slapped for that, but there's all different ways for people to use these. Thank you very much. I'm sure I went over, but
Thank you so much, Tyler. That was really interesting. I love the program, and we've seen programs like that popping up all over the nation. First one I seen was CDBG funds, but is inspiring me to maybe reach out to my own city about it. Our next speaker is Barbara Conroy. Barbara is a longtime Montpelier architect who served on the city planning commission during the recent zoning rewrite and is currently board chair of the Sustainable Montpelier Coalition, a group that catalyzes change by bringing together roundtables of diverse parties to formulate action plans. The Sustainable Montpelier Coalition is developing a new program on housing, beginning with the first step, something they call invisible infill housing. Take it away, Barbara.
Thanks so much, James. This has been really interesting, seeing all of the variety of different programs and projects that people are working on. This has worked out really well for me too, to be following up Tyler, since Tyler and I are both working in the same city. And I know what Tyler has been working really hard with the CBD grant. I didn't realize it was the first in the country. So we always like to be first and create models for other people. I'm going to take a look at this in Montpelier from a slightly different viewpoint. And it's great that Tyler was able to sort of introduce the concept of ADUs in existing houses. In Montpelier, we have an average of 2 people per dwelling unit. So that means that we have a lot of singles. We have a lot of large homes with very few people in them. But first, to set the scene, is that Montpelier is a city of neighborhoods. We are very attached to our neighborhoods. Many of them are historic in character. We have one of the state's largest historic design districts. So our neighborhood character was a very defining factor when we rewrote the zoning here in Montpelier. But unfortunately, that protectiveness that we feel around our neighborhoods has led to an excess of NIMBYism. As a result, I think Montpelier has acquired quite a bad reputation with housing developers because it's so difficult to build housing here, very much because of NIMBY. As I said before, we have a desperate need for housing and a desperate need for both homeowners and rental units as well, because our rental vacancy rate is less than 1%. And I recently heard about a small apartment where there were 20 people in line to get that particular unit. So we have a desperate need. The city's housing task force has identified additional housing barriers. One, of course, as we talked about here, is the high cost of new construction. Second, in Montpelier, we have very few available building lots. Certainly very few without something else already on them. And the other thing is, as Tyler pointed out, was the large size of existing houses and the existing historic single family homes, where the price of those homes really prices out most first time home buyers. So it's the Sustainable Montpelier Coalition. We asked, what could we do on a more immediate basis to step forward and overcome some of these barriers? So what we're proposing is the first step of a much broader housing initiative. But this first step we're calling invisible infill housing, because it has to do with carving ADUs out of existing homes, as you saw with Tyler, but also because to attempt to look at homes and creating duplex homes out of single family homes. And therefore you could potentially have a saleable unit, not just a rental unit. So how does this overcome our barriers? Well, one certainly is that the Montpelier zoning regulations allow both of these housing changes to be done by right. Both duplexing and ADUs are by right. So they really can't be necessarily stopped by neighbors. Also, without significant changes to the exterior buildings, as Tyler has pointed out too, is that there's nothing for people in the NIMBY crowd to be really concerned about. That there are really no changes. The character of the neighborhood is maintained. Everybody's happy. This is the invisible infill part of what I described before. And because we're using existing building lots, we're minimizing land disruption, which is, we have a lot of steep slopes here in Montpelier, and effectively cutting the housing carbon footprint of each family by half. Take two families, you put it into one house, then you have a significant reduction in that house carbon footprint. Also, many of our older Victorian homes are owned by older citizens, people who are anxious to downsize. We have a very large downsizer group that met many times before the pandemic, who really want to capitalize on their home equity. They've been paying for years, and now they have equity in their home. How can they transfer that into a new place to live? But unfortunately, new housing for elders tends to still be priced beyond the value of their homes. So while what we wanted to do was look at how do they remain in the city and still be able to take advantage of either amortizing the housing and maintenance costs of their house by creating an ADU and getting rental units, or realizing the equity that they've invested into their home by being able to split their home and sell off half of the duplex half to another owner through a condominium setup. So this allows for people who want to be landlords or willing to be landlords. Many older people are somewhat reluctant, if they haven't done it in the past, to become a landlord all of a sudden. But in the other case, with duplexing, it's also possible for them to split their home and be able to sell that off and have another person as a homeowner within the same building. This drastically reduces the cost of construction. I know, we've all been hearing about how the cost of construction has increased drastically lately. But it's also possible in some cases, and some of these cases you may have seen in Tyler's examples, that you could simply add a kitchen. You might be able to reuse a bathroom and create a new unit, add a few walls in, because there are some requirements in terms of providing separate entries and access. However, it's very possible to reuse all the existing services: water, sewer, electrical, sometimes even heat. So it also provides a very flexible solution that ADUs and duplex sizes can adapt over time, because it's already part of the building envelope. It's possible to actually make them bigger and smaller in accordance with what the family needs. So let's take a look at how this could potentially work. Todd, if you could share my slides, please. Okay, thanks, great. This is just my title slide. You can go to the next one, please. All right, so here's an example. This is an existing large 1895 Victorian single-family home on a quiet street. As you can tell, it's pretty steep back there. In 1986, it was bought by a couple as a single-family home, but they quickly added an ADU to the second floor because it was much larger than what they needed as a couple. However, over time, as the family grew, to allow more bedrooms, they took over part of the second floor and reduced the size of the ADU until eventually the ADU was on the second floor at the rear of the house. By 2010, the couple were older, empty nesters, so they moved down to the first floor. So now what happens to the second floor? But they still wanted the bedrooms for when their family visited. So I will also mention that they converted the second floor to an Airbnb unit. 2 bedrooms, bathroom, kitchenette, living room, the whole 9 yards. But very easily that could be converted into a duplex unit. So it's possible that within this one building, you could have a duplex, two living units, as well as an existing ADU. And let's see, could you go to the next slide, please? So this is the rear entrance into the ADU. It's been an ADU for 35 years, and it's been continuously occupied. So there's definitely a need for it in Montpelier. Other examples of these kinds of adaptations in Montpelier. Next slide, please. So many homes, this one is actually just 3 or 4 houses down from the one you just saw, were built as side-by-side duplexes. Next slide. Or over and under duplexes. This is a case where it was, has been a house that changed over time. At one point it was single family, then it was an apartment. Now it's actually a duplex where one family lives above the other. And next slide. And finally, I wondered if I was going to see this on Tyler's slideshow, because this is one that an ADU that was done as part of Tyler's program. And you can see at the back, which was originally sort of an attached garage-like structure that they took over and modified and put in a very nicely integrated ADU in there as well. So as you can see, we have a number of different possibilities within this program. And what we really want to have happen is to look at how we can do this most expeditiously. We have, as part of SMC, we have a neighborhood networking organization that we hope to make use of in order to do our outreach, to try to let the public know about this possibility and how simple it actually is. And as also another example that we drew from Tyler as well was the Brattleboro concept of a board, a volunteer board that provides technical assistance, because technical assistance is probably one of the biggest barriers as well to forming ADUs. People just don't know what they can do with what they have. So we'd like to be able to help them realize that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. And we're going to move on to our final speaker now, Mike Jasmine. Mike Jasmine has been in construction from his earliest memories, working with his builder dad. He has served on planning boards and zoning boards, as well as the select board, and has served as a code enforcement officer in the towns of Troy, Hillsborough, and for the past 7+ years, the community of Swansea, New Hampshire. So with that, I introduce Mike.
All right. That was brief, and I hope the rest of it will be as well. We're going to get to some questions. That's what's really going to happen. So I am, for intents and purposes, a building inspector who's very pro ADU. Spend a lot of time with my planning board, my zoning board, and my immediate supervisor is the planning director. So we interact a lot, and I think that helps create what I think is about as friendly a town hall as anybody could ever ask for. All right, get to my slides, please, Mr. Horner. Thank you. All right, mine's not nearly as polished or as exciting, but here we go. All right, that's me. Next slide, please. So in Swansea here, we've had, everybody's talking about ADUs, which is great. We kind of separate them between the attached versus the detached. The detached units, originally when we adopted, were to only be maximum 750 square feet. It was obvious that that was scaring away a couple of would-be builders, which is unfortunate. We wanted to get more value. So the voters went up to 1,000 square feet. If that goes as well as I hope it does, I'm hoping to punch it up just a little bit higher. But right now we're at 1,000 for either ADU. Next, please. All right, so we're going to give you 3 different projects here, and they're going to represent 3 different paths that seem to be the most common paths in my town. And I'm guessing they're similar to yours. And this is the first path, which is the path where everybody does what they're supposed to do the way they're supposed to do it. Keeping in mind, I am the guy who does the rules. All right, next slide, please. All right, so here's a great example, a family. All these stories are going to be very similar to all the stories you've already heard. Family buys a house. Mom wants to be closer. She lives far away. She wants to be closer. This house came with this building here, which was a wood shop. So we talked a lot about how it could happen. Next slide, please. And that's how it happened. So mom moves from far away. That's about 720 square feet. It's worked out just absolutely positively perfect. And of course, it's going to bring the homeowners in this market. The value could be brought back to them tomorrow. All right, next slide, please. All right, approvals. We don't need no stinking approvals. So sometimes in some towns, this may surprise you people, folks just go do whatever they want anyway. And then you find out about it after the fact. So now you've got this thing, and what do we do with it? Next slide, please. This was one of those. A very large home that you can't see. The gentleman had a landscaping business, also not supposed to have in that district, but that's fine. Built a big garage. While he was building it under previous building inspector, he said, I'd like to build it a little taller on the second floor. Building inspector said, sure, make it taller on the second floor, why not? And then he went to sell it. And I usually find these things when I'm selling them or when they're selling them. So the real estate agent comes into town and they realize that there's some things that may not have been permitted, like an entire residence. So this particular individual had this, it was actually a very done, and they generally are, which is the lovely thing, had a very large apartment above the garage. So we worked with them, and I think that's the important thing. I know we've got committees and a lot of good companies and things, but I think it's important that we in government do our best to serve the community as if we're running private business and not government. So we sat down, tried to figure out how we were going to make this work. Next slide, please. So we got it through the zoning board, and the rest of the stuff, part of making it work was getting an actual stair that was code compliant, including the roof. And it all went well, it had its own septic system and the rest of it. Now it's there, now it's legal. And now more importantly, the town and me in particular, it's not all altruistic. I have a label for that, I know what it is. And if it becomes something else, we can act accordingly. All right, next slide, please. All right, I'm going to guess by looking at some of the other people here that there's actually some people who know who Underdog is. That's wonderful. I'm starting to get used to being the oldest guy in the room in every room I'm in. This is a case where we have a family, again, where DADUs come to the rescue. Next slide, please. So the little house that you see there sits on a non-conforming lot. To the left of the house was another non-conforming lot. At one point, and they were owned by the same property owner. Well, she was noticing that she was paying a tax bill on a building lot, and it was starting to become a bit onerous. So she came into the planning board, or the planning office. And what do I do? I said, well, you could merge them, but it's a non-conforming lot, and if you merge it, you won't be able to subdivide it again. So you got to know that when you merge them, you own it forever. That's just what it'll always be. So she went ahead and merged it, saved herself a couple bucks in taxes the next 2 or 3 years. But then her son, who was starting a plumbing business and was having a little bit of a difficult time in his personal life, needed to move back home. So he moves back home with a girlfriend, 2 kids, 2 dogs, and a mom, and needs room for a business. What's he going to do? Well, we built the garage. The business is in the garage. And when we went to design the garage, and I talked to him, and this is the same thing I do with every person that walks into my office every single day who's getting ready to build anything, is I always think about where could we put an ADU in this thing, if not now, maybe in the future. We made sure we got trusses big enough so that it would meet the space requirements to be able to put in an ADU at some future date. That future date looks like it's going to be next year. And as you've already heard from several of the presenters, Mom's going to leave the house. She's going to go up to the ADU, which is above the garage, and the kids are going to occupy the house with now her grandchildren. She'll be where she can help them and they can help her. Next slide, please. All right, let's see some questions.
All right, thank you so much, Mike. That was great.
All right.
I just want to start off by reminding people that we're taking questions. I have quite a few questions on a Word document I've been kind of tracking in the notes. I know that Mike from Vital Communities has suggested people raise their hand if they want to ask their question audibly. Because we have 76 people on this webinar today, I would just ask that people who raise their hands also put maybe a brief version of their comment, their question in the chat box, and it'll make it easier for me to call on you. And while we wait for people to raise their hand and ask their questions in the chat box, I'll take some of the ones that we got during the presentations, and I'll pitch them. And because I have control of the microphone right now, I'm going to ask the first question from myself. And so this question's for Mike. And Mike, the question is, what advice would you have for other code enforcement officers who are hesitant to take a friendly approach to accessory dwelling unit approvals and permitting?
I would tend to believe that individual isn't just unfriendly towards ADUs. You got to understand what your job is here. Your job is to serve the public that pays your bill. You're here for them. You're here to help them. You're not here to just present the roadblock. You're here to help them figure out a way over it. Okay. We have to do things to keep people safe. We have to do things to keep, especially New Hampshire, our property values in such a manner that we can continue to operate our towns. But you got to work with people. And that's basically it. I don't know how else to do that is you have to make sure that you're customer service oriented. And if the committees and the other people in these towns and everybody on here is above all else, people should be friendly and helpful. That's their job. And I don't know how to make any, that's all I got for you, really.
No, that's great. All right. Thank you so much, Mike. I'm gonna switch over to our first speaker, and Chris. For Chris, this is a question from Mike Geis at Vital Communities. What kind of help did people seek to create the ADUs you have shown in your presentation today?
Sure. So each family that's reached out to us thus far was looking for someone to basically quarterback the entire process, from nailing down what the proper layout and size was in their backyard, where should the windows look at, to securing all of the necessary permits with the towns, and then also make sure that it was built correctly to their standard and done in a timely, on budget manner. So basically all in one. They were looking for help right across the process in order to make sure, basically to have certainty that once they started building a new house, that what came out on the other side was what they were actually expecting, and also was in the budget they initially expected it to be in, which we've heard has been a pretty big issue across construction for many, many years. And it's become even harder in the last year with the insanity of material prices moving all over the place. But I mentioned as well, we've had more and more people interested in us trying to help them get a DIY shell that's waterproof, weatherproof, possibly with the power on, so that they can take some of the costs out of the process. Like, what does a general contractor need to manage all of the subs on the site? What do we need to make sure that the house is what it's supposed to be? Does somebody want to go to Habitat for Humanity Restore and find flooring for less money? Do they want to hunt Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace? So we've had a lot of people interested in that, and we've got our first 2 DIY projects, one in Maine and one in Northampton, that we're going to roll out next year. And gosh, I'm a huge DIYer. It's part of why I started working on this. I've been whether I've got some multifamilies that I've done over the years, and I'm learning how to ask people for help. But I love DIY, and I would love to see more people DIY their own ADUs. It's the best way to drop costs quickly.
Thanks so much for that, Chris. And I see we have a couple questions in the chat box. We have a question from Anne. She asked if one is planned in a community like Queechee, Vermont, what are the restrictions? And so I don't know if anyone here can speak specifically to Queechee, but if somebody wants to give a quick response to that, happy to do that. And go for it.
I can. Okay, I'm the Planning and Development Director in the town of Hartford. Queechee is one of the villages within our community. My name is Lori Hirschfield. I'll put my video on, maybe. Okay. So what you were talking about, it depends on whether you are within the planned development area. Do you know if it's a qualified property? If somebody wants to, whoever asked the question, if it is within the planned development, there are certain restrictions on what you can do. There are, so it would be best for you to just give me a call, and I can walk you through it depending on what you're talking about in terms of what property. My number in my office is 802-295-3075.
Thank you so much for that, Laurie. That's fantastic. I'm gonna pitch a question to actually 2 of the speakers here. This came up in a couple of different comments, and it was discussed a little bit in the chat box as well. And it has to do with short-term rentals. And so this question is for Barbara and Mike. Do you see short-term rentals of ADUs as a threat to the availability of ADUs as long-term housing? What are the best practices in managing short-term rentals without limiting the opportunity associated with these new housing choices?
Well, I guess I would say that it has to do with the flexibility of long-term rentals. I saw that there was a question about if you rent someone more than 30 days, then they're really not a short-term rental, and that's true. So you have to either decide if it's going to be Airbnb or it's going to be long-term. But the point I brought up with our housing task force about this very question has to do with the provision of full kitchen facilities, for example. You know, most ADUs might have a little kitchenette, but they really aren't. It's not a full kitchen. It's not something that you would actually rent as an apartment on a long-term basis. And Montpelier also has some, not zoning, but building regulations having to do with fire separation and those kinds of elements too, that pertain to rental units, to long-term rental units. So that's to somewhat, in some cases that can create more difficulty, and people may end up leaving their Airbnb as it is.
Yeah, and I would say just for me, I mean, it would be pretty hard to monitor and to enforce, and I don't know that I even would want to. You know, we're selling these things as having income potential, and I'm not gonna. I couldn't imagine a day when we would. It's obviously going to make it harder for the people that would have a full-time residency, but it's going to be geographical. I mean, I don't see anybody, my community, I guess to a certain degree, nobody's going to want to spend a week in Swansea necessarily. I mean, it's a great place to live, but you wouldn't necessarily want to visit there. So, you know, I think that's kind of where we are.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the response, both Mike and Barbara. I have another question here for Chris and RJ, and it has to do with your businesses. So how do you see your work relative to social impact? Do you envision your business as a model to be replicated by people in other communities, or do you have ambitions to expand and cover a larger geographic area as you refine your business model?
I'm happy to jump in there. When it comes to building more housing, America is something like 1 million housing units short since 2008, when we stopped building as much housing. And, so the pie is really big. And, right now you're looking at the marketing efforts of, of companies like Backyard ADUs and WheelPad. We are, it would be great to have, more business competition, because then the idea is going to get out there, right? I mean, I'm not necessarily scared of it. Why, yes, I would love to sell everyone my ADU and make all the money in the world and be all powerful, but that's not the end goal. The end goal is to increase the amount of housing that's available, so we can have a functioning community here. So that's sort of how I come to the table seeing it. And Chris and I have had, offline conversations, and I know that's how he feels, but I'll let him answer the question as well.
Yeah. So I'll start by saying I personally don't see, well, I'll start by saying I totally love local, but on top of that, I also don't see a disconnect between having a business model that is scalable in order to bring what you're doing to more people. I think if you can always remember that a good corporation should be dual missioned in the spirit of being a B Corp, where you have a profit motive, but you also have a motive of taking care of the people in the community that you're, in our case, building houses for. As long as you're looking at those as 50-50 missions, growth is a good thing for everybody involved in the company and the people that we're building for. And our company goal is to constantly try to find ways to drive costs down and build more housing. And the way to do that is to continually refine the business model so we can serve more communities. And one of the ways that we're trying to do that is the DIY shells. We make less money on a DIY shell, but we can ship a ready to finish DIY shell anywhere in New England. And then somebody can build a house for a really affordable rate. So I think they're hand in hand. I think the business just has to remember that they should be dual missioned. And I really believe in the spirit of a B Corp, where you can get big, but as long as you've got two sets of shareholders, then you don't have to be evil. And it's not like Google not being evil. They probably are, but you can be right. And I think a really good example of a company that we're modeling ourselves after as we grow is Revision Energy. They're a solar company out of Maine that is quite big. And they have tentacles into New Hampshire and Mass, and they're going commercial beyond that. And they are a wonderful B Corp. And look at what they've done in terms of helping adoption of solar across New England. We would hate it if they thought they could only build in Portland.
Thank you. That was great, Chris. And I agree. Revision Energy is a great business model. If people are not familiar with that, I highly recommend they check that out. You'll be quite impressed. I have a question here from Patty Eisenhower. Asks, does creating an ADU trigger a wastewater permit application with the state? She worries about the need to upgrade the septic systems. Might be cost prohibitive. So if anybody has thought, I haven't thought about this, but I'll wait. And if anybody else has a response in this.
So as part of Swansea's rule, you have to get somebody, you have to get a certified septic inspector out to look at the septic and make sure that it complies with RSA such and such, such and such. I ask people that have to do that. They get me the report. But the thing I'm more concerned about, and the thing I really want verification on, is if it fails, can it be replaced? And can it be replaced affordably and easily. Again, it's more about making sure the customer understands that if this added load happens, you know, what could be in the future for them. I wouldn't want them to be surprised. But we already have a minimum 3-bedroom septic rule in town anyway. So as everybody noted, a few people are filling out these houses anyway. So we really generally have more than enough capacity to take on an extra bedroom with 1 or 2 people in it.
Mike, is the 3-bedroom septic rule pretty wide in New Hampshire? And if anyone knows Vermont?
No, it's not. It's one of our special little rules that maybe should be changed at some point. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
I'll just add on to what Mike has stated, that at least in New Hampshire, I don't know, maybe someone from Vermont can speak to Vermont, but at least in New Hampshire, DES, which is the Department of Environmental Services, does allow for a septic plan to exist before you have to like fully implement it. So as Mike was saying, you build an ADU, you don't have to go build a new septic system just because you're building an ADU, but you do have to have a plan on file so that when your existing ADU, when your existing septic system fails, the state already knows what you're going to install as its replacement, which I think is, you know, a really good and creative solution to bridge the gap between the two needs.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there was Vermont has a lot of similar rules to that, and you know, if you're going to build an ADU and have a septic system, you want to make sure that that septic system is going to work. Trust me, you'll be happy that it was engineered by someone who knows what they're doing, and you'll be happy that the state got your permit. If it ever comes to sell or anything like that, you're going to want to do it right. The state of Vermont, we had you know, engineers can go in. It's required for design flow, you know, just to check to see how it is for ADUs, even if it's in an existing home. Hey, it doesn't hurt to look. We've gone into a bunch of places and been like, wow, you're running this whole thing through a 1/2-inch intake and, you know, 3 inches out. Like, that's not going to work for the house you live in, much less adding space. So even if it isn't required, I would highly recommend having your water that comes in and your water that goes out checked by a professional.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the response on that, Mike and Tyler. All right, let's see. What else do we have here? Heidi asks, does the state provide any recourse or guidance in dealing with town zoning boards to acquire an exception or a variance to local regulations?
Sorry, could you do that one more time, James?
Yeah, does the state, it could be Vermont or New Hampshire, I won't restrict it to one state or the other, provide any recourse or guidance in dealing with town zoning boards to acquire an exception or a variance? So it sounds like this person maybe is not able to come to terms with a town about something they want to do with their ADU and wondering what their next steps are.
Plagiarize from the town that already has it.
Yeah.
Ours works. I don't want to say flawlessly, but it works really well and it covers the bases and it's been proven to work. So, you know, you're welcome to call me. You're welcome to look, obviously online. You can go to Swansea's website and you can see that ordinance and it's a pretty foolproof ordinance, I believe. One of the things that we have in ours that I haven't heard mentioned yet is the owner of the property has to live in one. So part of the fear that people have is that they're just going to both become rentals. And part of this thing is to make sure that the owners have skin in the game, because it's supposed to be to the advantage of the property owner, not to the advantage of a real estate investor. So in our ordinance, and that's one of the reasons I'm worried about the short-term rental question, because this is already hard enough to enforce. The property owner has to live in one. Doesn't matter which one, but has to live in one as the primary.
Yeah, that's not true in Montpelier any longer. That used to be part of our zoning, but that was recently changed. Nor does the owner necessarily have to live in the larger portion. of the house. You know, they could move into the ADU that they form in their house, and then someone else could rent the larger part.
I can comment a bit on the variance too. We get asked a lot from people if they can try to do a variance to bypass a setback or a size requirement or the owner occupancy. And it's not really a feasible thing to try to get. And if you do get denied, you have to pretty much go through land court. And if you don't hire an attorney, it's going to be very difficult to get the town decision overturned. So the key is you got to find a way to do it within the ordinance. And you've got to be creative to convince the board that what you're trying to do is within the ordinance, not that you're looking for an exception in the ordinance. And like everyone's saying, that the ordinances are there for a reason. And a lot of them, some of them need to be updated, but a lot of the ones that are newer are really quite good. But I'll leave it with, there's a lot of creative ways to convince a board that something's within an ordinance. They're looking for ways to help you. Just like Mike is keeps saying, often boards are on the side of the person who's presenting.
I agree they are, and we have issued variances for them. AADU, attached accessory dwelling units, are by right, and BADUs are by special exception. I've never seen anyone turned down for special exception yet.
Well, I just want to take a moment to thank everybody for all the questions they've answered. And I see now that it's 6:59, and it's probably time for us to close out this wonderful gathering that we've had. And I'd like to pass it along back to Mike to make closing comments for our webinar.
Yeah, James, this is Todd. I just got a note that Mike's computer went kaput, so I'll close this out here real quickly. And just to keep it brief, first of all, thank you to James as our moderator and our panelists. This has been really eye-opening and educational for me. I'm sure many of our attendees feel similarly. So thank you for spending some time with us this evening to share with us about ADUs. And thank you to everyone from New Hampshire, Vermont, and beyond for tuning in. This is, hopefully the beginning of a wider movement to popularize this type of development in both of our states. So thank you for attending. I understand that Vital Communities, who's hosting our Zoom meeting tonight, will be reaching out to attendees with a recording and perhaps contact information for our panelists, and perhaps some resources for you to dig in a little bit deeper. And we may also be reaching out to learn from folks if we are able to organize future programming, what you might be interested in learning more about. We've just sort of skimmed the surface tonight. Just learning about various pieces of the issue, but there's a wealth of information to dig in deeper into. So again, thank you all for attending, and look for that email with more information and recording. Tell your friends, tell your family about ADUs. You've learned a little bit about what your options are tonight. So let's get to it. We as homeowners can be home creators. That's the theme tonight. So thank you again for attending, and have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.